amid countless worlds that seem like pure fiction. Lie battles, sacrifices, and secrets that have never been told. Every story is a war between destiny and choice. If you're ready to uncover heroes, villains, and the forgotten souls lost in between, then step into the world of Comic Recap, where every tale is a battle for survival.
It looks like you've pasted file paths or content for text that needs paraphrasing. Could you clarify which specific text you'd like me to paraphrase into English? You can paste the relevant text here. Weapons made from whalebone are considered to be of very high quality. Some sources from Tamriel even suggest they surpass certain metal weapons found there, being both stronger and lighter, a notable detail from the lore. The sea giants appear to be organized in a rather primitive way, as they have chiefs, indicating they likely live in small, tribal communities similar to orcs. However, titles like captain, used when they're at sea, suggest they may have more complex hierarchies in certain contexts. Not much is known about their cultural organization beyond this, though it's clear that half-giants are always subordinate to full sea giants, often seen serving them rather than the other way around. Earlier, their language was mentioned, although there's limited official information in the game's lore. Compiled voice lines in their native tongue reveal that their language shares some vocabulary with the language of regular giants, but remains distinct overall. This difference makes sense given how long these related species have been separated, assuming both originated from Atmora. In the Elder Scrolls Online, which takes place in the year 582 of the Second Era, notably Cold Year players can encounter sea giants raiding northern coastal villages. Their absence in the Elder Scrolls V. Skyrim doesn't necessarily mean they went extinct, since lore suggests they only occasionally land on Tamriel, and their absence could simply be due to it not being a particularly cold year during Skyrim's events. Turning to another ancient and debated group in the lore, the left-handed elves, also known as Sinistral Elves, or Sinistral Mer. These elves lived on the continent of Yokuda, far west of Tamriel, during the Merethic and possibly early First Era. They shared this land with the dark-skinned human race, known as the Yokudans. After migrating to Tamriel, the Yokudans became known as the Red Guards. Historically, the left-handed elves ruled over Yokuda, forming an empire that supposedly spanned most of the continent, which was then nearly 4 times the size of Tamriel. Their empire featured grand structures, including the legendary Orichalk Tower and temples built from gypsum alabaster, a material associated with their architecture. The human population, under their rule, suffered in unspecified ways, possibly through slavery, similar to humans under Allied rule in Cyrodiil, or through a system of second-class citizenship akin to humans living under the Dureni in High Rock. Despite this suffering, the two groups coexisted long enough for elements of the left-handed elves' language to influence the Yokudan language, allowing modern Tamrielic scholars to decipher some ancient texts. It's unclear whether the elf empire was centralized under a single ruler, or made up of multiple allied states, similar to the Allied Empire. Eventually, the empire collapsed after. Is this conversation helpful so far? One theory suggests that the Khajiit may have killed them in an attempt to expand their territory over Cyrodiil. Another theory, mentioned by some in the lore, is that the bird-like people were among the first races enslaved by the aliens, or wild elves, as they began settling on Taman. This led to their gradual extinction as they were enslaved and eventually killed by the aliens whose kingdoms and empire were largely built on the subjugation of those they considered inferior. These are the theories proposed by scholars in the universe, but I have a few other ideas as well. One theory I've come across is that it was just a tribe of early humans similar to the kin. Nymphs are extremely shy and solitary creatures, making them very rare and even less likely to be found in populated areas. They tend to live in remote, natural environments, often near the coast, in caves or grottos where they keep to themselves and avoid contact with others. Despite not being associated with the sea in Daggerfall, nymphs often reside in coastal areas or on deserted tropical islands. Nature is a central part of their lives, and their homes are typically located in isolated spots, surrounded by beautiful landscapes. One researcher spent 3 months attempting to approach a nymph named AA, living in a cave off the coast of Hammerfell. He offered gifts and behaved in a non-threatening manner until she finally appeared to him. She only opened up after he addressed her in her own language. He described her as incredibly beautiful, with an enchanting smile and laugh, but also as extremely wise and knowledgeable. Nymphs seem to have a remarkable memory and a deep understanding of the natural world, which is likely why they are so closely tied to nature. AA shared knowledge about plants, animals, spirits, and even creatures that are too small or timid for most people to ever encounter. She seemed to know more about the wilderness than even the most learned Bosmer scholars. Nymphs appear to live for an extremely long time, possibly foreversants. They refer to humans and elves as mortals. Over their lifetimes, they accumulate vast knowledge of the world around them. The researcher claimed that AA taught him how to truly learn again and to open his mind to new ways of thinking. He concluded his work by recommending that anyone who encounters a nymph should speak to her, as there's much to gain from the experience. However, a note from the Imperial University at the end of his manuscript states that the researcher is no longer affiliated with the university and vanished after submitting his work. This suggests he may have left to live with the nymph, possibly having fallen in love with her. Despite their beauty and wisdom, it is generally advised not to approach a nymph without careful preparation, as they are dangerous. They can only be harmed by silver or better weapons, are resistant to poison and paralysis, and possess magic that can put others to sleep or drain their energy. As for why nymphs have not appeared in games since Daggerfall, while the simple answer is that the developers removed them, there may be more to it. One theory is that after the researchers' work was published, people began to hunt nymphs for their valuable hair, which has alchemical properties, or for more exploitative reasons. This could have led to their numbers dwindling and the survivors retreating even further from civilization, making them almost impossible to find in later games. Regarding their absence in Elder Scrolls Online, which is set centuries before Daggerfall, it's possible that nymphs, the Sea Elves, also known as the Marmor, are a race of elves that were introduced in the Elder Scrolls Online, but have existed in the lore for a long time. The Marmor primarily reside on the jungle continent of Pand and the surrounding islands, located south of Tamriel. They share some similarities with High Elves in terms of appearance, but have notable differences. They have milky white, almost translucent skin, white eyes, and some even possess fish-like features, including gills. This has led to other elves, particularly High Elves, referring to them derisively as fish elves. While the appearance of other races in Tamriel can be explained, such as the Dunmer's gray skin due to Azura's punishment. The reason for the Marmor's unique traits remains unclear. Some theories suggest that the Marmor's ancestors, the Almer, the progenitors of all elves, might have interbred with intelligent fish-like beasts on Pand, explaining their appearance. However, this theory is based on unreliable sources, and it may even be propaganda aimed at discrediting the Marmor. The Marmor have a long-standing and bitter rivalry with the High Elves, dating back thousands of years. This conflict is centered around the battle for control of the Somerset Isles. Over the millennia, both sides have spread propaganda against each other. The Marmor claim to be the purest race of elves, while the High Elves have cast the Marmor in a negative light, often exaggerating their faults. Much of the information we have about the Marmor is thus suspect, with recent sources from the Marmor themselves helping to provide a more balanced view. The Marmor's origins can be traced back to the time before all elves were divided into different races. Originally, the Almer, the common ancestor of all elves, lived on the island continent of Almoris, which was described as a massive elven city that spanned the entire land. However, at some point, Almoris faced an undefined doom, causing its inhabitants to flee to Tamriel. Before the Exodus, however, a group of elves had already left Almoris, becoming the Sea Elves. This group, led by a wealthy and influential noble named Orgom, did not leave voluntarily, but were instead exiled. Orgom had led a rebellion against the rulers of Almoris, but his efforts failed, and he and his followers were forced to leave the continent. Once their ships departed, a magical mist was conjured around Almoris, ensuring they could never return, and the exiled elves were left to wander the seas. This marked the beginning of the Marmor, who would later evolve separately from the other elven races in Tamriel. Homeland was unachievable, so Orgnum took his fleet and sailed east, where he and his followers eventually discovered the mysterious continent of Pand. This large island, covered in jungles, beaches, reefs, and inland swamps, was home to strange and dangerous monsters, and was completely surrounded by a mysterious mist. Despite these dangers, Orgnum and his followers made the continent their home, with Orgnum declaring himself king of the exiles. Over time, these exiles evolved into the Sea Elves we know today. There's a theory about how their appearance changed so dramatically from the Almer Elves, who resembled High Elves, to the pale-skinned Sea Elves with fish-like features. One theory suggests they interbred with the native beast races of Pand, but I have another idea. I believe it was Orgnum, now king, who used powerful magic to transform his people so they could better adapt to their new environment. With their current forms, they can drink salt water, are incredibly agile in water, and never get seasick, though they do get landsick, which they find amusing. Some even joke about preferring to be at sea rather than on land. Orgnum is described as an extremely powerful, immortal wizard, with some claiming his powers are godlike. In fact, some in Tamil even regard him as an avatar of the serpent god Satakal from the Udan pantheon, though this view is not universally accepted and is considered blasphemous by most red god worshippers. Regardless of how he gained his powers, Orgnum is known to be a very powerful wizard, capable of physically altering his people. Whether or not it was he who changed their appearance, he remains a central figure in their society. After all, he is said to still be alive after many millennia, still leading the Sea Elves. Orgnum's immortality is said to come from either vampirism, strange rituals involving sacrifices, or possibly even divine ascension. He is also described by those who have met him as growing younger each year, though it's uncertain how true this is. From the few descriptions we have of his physical appearance, he does not seem very old, so there may be some truth to this. While much of how Orgnum rules is unknown, we do know that his intense hatred for the Almer, who once exiled him and his followers, has driven him to attack the Somerset Isles repeatedly throughout history. After the elves who fled Almeris settled there, Orgnum couldn't stand their peaceful existence, and he held the High Elves responsible for his ancient banishment. His hatred for them and desire to conquer Somerset shaped the Sea Elves' entire society, with many Sea Elves living only to serve Orgnum's will. His subjects are fiercely loyal, and will do anything to help him conquer the Somerset Isles. Despite numerous attempts, the Sea Elves, under Orgnum's leadership, have never been able to successfully conquer Somerset. They did conquer smaller islands south of Tamriel, but they never gained a significant foothold on Somerset itself, repeatedly being repelled by the High Elves. Interestingly, there was a brief period at the end of the Second Era during the Tiber Wars, when some Sea Elves allied with Somerset to resist Tiber Septim's empire, as they disliked the empire even more than the High Elves. However, this alliance quickly dissolved when the High Elves abandoned the Sea Elves during an imperial attack, and the Sea Elf attacks on Somerset resumed into the Third Era. The last recorded attack, led by Orgnum on Somerset, occurred in year 110 of the Third Era. During the War on the Isles, the Marmor launched everything they had in an attempt to conquer the Sioux at Al. However, this time, the High Elves were supported by the Empire's navy and the Sigic Order. The combined strength of these forces was so overwhelming that the entire Marmor Sea Fleet was destroyed. Since that battle, it is said that the Marmor never tried to conquer Somerset Isle again, and they have remained unusually quiet on the war front. There could be several reasons for this, not the least of which could be that the Marmor finally grew tired of Orgnum after such a devastating defeat and after millennia of his leadership. Despite Orgnum being immensely powerful, his aggressive actions towards the High Elves had only resulted in failure. By the Second Era, some Marmor clans and individuals even broke away from Orgnum, with entire fleets abandoning his cause and sailing westward to conquer islands in an attempt to gain independence. In Elder Scrolls Online, there are examples of Marmor who no longer follow Orgnum, and after rejecting his influence or hate, they no longer harbor any deep animosity towards the High Elves. While they still dislike them, they are no longer willing to fight in a pointless war just because their immortal king tells them to. The Imga, in terms of advancement and intelligence, are on par with other races, though they are not simply an animalistic species, as some might suggest. They share a certain respect for the Bosmer, often coexisting in large tree cities, where the Imga live in the treetops as part of the ecosystem. There are some unverified post-Bethesda texts from former developers indicating that some Bosmer may not be fond of the Imga, but this contradicts what we know, so it's not entirely reliable. However, it suggests that in some parts of Valenwood, there may be occasional conflict or indifference between the two races. The Imga definitely avoid conflict with the High Elves. They are said to idolize the High Elves to an almost absurd degree, viewing them as the epitome of society. As such, Many Imga consider the High Elves to be their superiors and show them extreme respect. They strive to emulate them in various ways, wearing capes like the High Elves, attempting to mimic their speech patterns, often clumsily, practicing with High Elf weapons, and adopting exaggerated titles that hold no real meaning outside their leadership structures. They also imitate High Elf behavior, such as pretending to despise humans and wearing their capes in such a way that they can sniff the edges to avoid the putrid smell they believe humans have, a sentiment likely learned from the High Elves themselves. In rare cases, some Imga have even tried to shave their fur and powder their skin to resemble High Elves, though they typically fail, resulting in a comical and pitiful image of a hairless, bloodied ape. Despite this, not all Imga engage in such extreme imitation. Most simply live their lives peacefully in the trees and ruins of Valenwood. The lore suggests that the extreme behaviors are not widespread, as they typically prefer to remain in the jungle, away from the conflicts of war. The Imga are rumored to have been part of content planned for Elder Scrolls Online, but were ultimately cut before they appeared in the game, leaving us with limited visual or conceptual information. However, there were mentions of Imga treasure hunts and their fascination with High Elf cutlery, which they considered highly valuable. The names of Imga, found in cut content, are quite primitive, almost caveman-like. For instance, 2 clan chieftains were named Kunun and Biar, and 3 other Imga names included Fush, Hum, and Wood. Despite this, the Imga were likely intended to play only a minor role, appearing in a few quests. Their isolation during times of war, hiding deep in the jungle to avoid becoming collateral damage, suggests they would only re-emerge during peaceful periods. Interestingly, there have been speculations about a large Imga colony in the walking city of Finse, a location absent from the main Elder Scrolls Online game. If this city is eventually explored in future content, it could provide more insight into the Imga's role in the world, which may lead to more detailed exploration of their culture. The chieftain is supported by a shaman in spiritual matters and a war chief in military affairs. They are considered the original followers of Zen, the god of toil, and it is believed that sailors and fishermen spread Zen's worship throughout southern Tamriel, especially to Veenboot near the Yen. The full scope of their pantheon is not entirely known, but it is known to include both Aedra and Draw, with Sufus Vile being a key deity alongside Zen and En Clavus Vile. Additionally, out-of-game texts claim they worshipped 3 gods, the Mothers of the Around Us, consisting of Mara, Deb, and Kin, with Deb and Kin being aspects of Debella and Kinra, respectively. Mara is considered the first, though these claims come from unofficial sources and should be taken with caution. Their society remained largely undeveloped until the end of their existence, during the period of the Riem Empire's conquest of Black Marsh. At that time, they aided the Empire by managing cities and providing soldier garrisons. Some kingi held notable positions within the Empire, including one named Zook, who was a guard to Riemann III's wife and played a role in his assassination. While the kingi may have prospered briefly during the Empire's occupation, their society collapsed after being devastated by the Canaran flu, which spread throughout Black Marsh in the mid to late Second Era. Most of their population was wiped out, with only a few survivors remaining by 583 of the Second Era, the year in which Elder Scrolls Online is set. The survivors were mostly found in Still Rise Village, cursed with immortality by Clavicus Vile after surviving the flu. Further details about Still Rise Village and the Canaran flu are covered in another video. Now, turning to the Imga, a curious and somewhat humorous beast race that appeared in earlier games. The Imga are intelligent apes, native to the jungles of Valenwood, living in treetops, old elvish ruins, and Bosmer cities. They are believed to have been the original beast race of Valenwood, predating the Bosmer. The Imga are described as a mix of large apes and humans, with thick fur and taller than most high elves. Some people, particularly those from distant lands, have doubted the existence of the Imga, thinking they are just racist portrayals of wood elves. But there are numerous first and second-hand accounts confirming their existence. The Imga are highly agile and possess good hand-eye coordination, although their intelligence seems to be lower than that of the playable races. They have a tribal society but do not claim land for themselves, living instead in trees and buildings left by other races. The Imga are not skilled in crafting advanced weaponry, though they can use tools and weapons made by others. Their cooking and musical instruments are simple, with basic dishes and instruments like drums. Despite these limitations, the Imga maintain a functional society based on simplicity. Nymphs are extremely shy and live solitary lives, making them very rare and even more rarely seen in densely populated areas. They tend to inhabit remote locations, often near coastlines, despite not being directly linked to the sea and Daggerfall. Their homes are usually caves or grottos surrounded by untouched natural beauty, which seems essential to their way of life. They avoid contact with others and keep to themselves in these secluded places, sometimes even on deserted tropical islands. In one study, a researcher spent 3 months patiently waiting and bringing small gifts to a particular nymph he found living in a coastal cave in Hammerfell. He had to present himself as non-threatening and eventually addressed her in her own language before she finally appeared and interacted with him. The researcher described her as stunningly beautiful and profoundly wise. She possessed extraordinary knowledge of nature and the creatures that live in it far beyond even the most learned Bosmer scholars. She could explain the workings of deep forests and the lives of animals, including ones too small or timid for mortals to ever encounter. The nymph taught the researcher a new way of learning and thinking, encouraging him to expand his mind beyond conventional ideas. He concluded that anyone who ever meets a nymph should speak with her, as there is much to be learned. However, his report ends with a note from the Imperial University stating that the author left the manuscript and vanished from civilization, suggesting he may have chosen to live with the nymph. Despite their wisdom, nymphs are considered dangerous if approached carelessly. They can only be harmed by silver or better weapons, resist paralysis and poison, and are capable of casting spells that induce sleep and drain energy. As for their disappearance from later games, one possible explanation is that after the researchers' findings became known, people began to hunt nymphs for their knowledge, their alchemically valuable hair, and potentially other reasons. This may have caused the surviving nymphs. It seems like you've pasted a file path list or file names. Could you clarify which text you'd like paraphrased into English? If it's from one of these files, it would help if you could share the content you need paraphrased. The Sea Elves, also known as the Marmor, are a distinct elven race introduced in the Elder Scrolls Online, though they have been part of the lore for a long time. They are found mainly on the southern continent of Pand and some nearby islands. Physically, they resemble high elves, but with pale, almost translucent skin, white eyes, and fish-like traits. Some even have gills, leading to the derogatory nickname Fish Elves, used by some high elves, which is understandable given their appearance. While the reason behind their unique appearance remains unclear, some speculate that after their ancestors, the Almer, the progenitors of all elven races, arrived on the tropical continent of Pand, they interbred with intelligent fish-like creatures. However, this theory is unreliable and might be propaganda from the High Elves. In fact, much of the information about the Marmor is unreliable, as they have had a long-standing feud with the High Elves of Somerset. This conflict, which has lasted for millennia, involves a great deal of mutual hostility and propaganda. The Marmor claim to be the purest elven race, while the High Elves have done their best to tarnish their reputation. The Marmor's origins can be traced back to the Almer, the common ancestor of all elves, who once lived on the mythical continent of Almoris. This continent was said to be a sprawling elven city, but was eventually abandoned after facing an unspecified doom. Long before the rest of the Almer fled to Tamriel, a group of them, led by a noble named Orgum, left the continent early. Unlike the others, they were not voluntary exiles, but were banished due to a failed rebellion led by Orgum. After being defeated, Orgum and his followers were forced onto ships and sent away, with a magical mist soon surrounding the continent, ensuring they could never return. Homeland was impossible to reach, so Orgum took his fleet and sailed east. Eventually, he and his followers discovered the mysterious continent of Pand, a vast island covered in jungles, beaches, reefs, and inland swamps, home to all sorts of strange and dangerous creatures. The continent was surrounded by an eerie mist, adding to its mystery. Despite the dangers, Orgum and his followers made it their new home. Orgum, now a nobleman, declared himself king over the exiles, who, over time, evolved into the Sea Elves we know today. There has been some speculation about how their appearance changed so drastically from the Almer Elves, who resembled High Elves, to the Sea Elves with their pale skin and fish-like traits. One theory is that they interbred with the native beast races of Pand, while another theory I personally favor is that Orgum himself, using powerful magic, transformed his people to better adapt them to their new environment. The Sea Elves' current form allows them to drink salt water, be extremely agile in the water, and never suffer from seasickness. Interestingly, they can get landsick, with some even complaining about standing on land instead of being on a ship or in the sea. Orgum is believed to be a highly powerful and immortal wizard, with some people in Tamriel claiming that his power is almost godlike. A few even go as far as suggesting he might be the avatar of the serpent god Satakal from the Udan pantheon. However, this interpretation is not universally accepted and is considered blasphemous by most followers of the Red Gods who worship Satakal. Regardless of how Orgum gained his powers, it is clear that he is an incredibly potent wizard, and his magic has been shown to physically alter his people. This supports the idea that he may have used his immense power to change his people and help them adapt to the dangerous waters and reefs of their tropical new home. Imga are often portrayed online as unintelligent, primitive beings, but that depiction may not be entirely accurate. There are two known Imga in history who demonstrate a much higher level of intelligence than the stereotype suggests. This could mean that the perceived intelligence gap has been exaggerated, or perhaps Imga have similar intellectual potential to other races, but lack formal education due to their tribal lifestyles. One example is an unnamed Imga necromancer who became a Laika transformation that requires immense magical skill and even temporarily ruled a city tyrannically before being overthrown. Another is the prophet Maruk, an Imga from the First Era who transcribed the Alessian doctrines after reportedly receiving a vision from Saint Alessia. His writings laid the foundation for the Alessian Order, a radical religious movement that significantly influenced the history of the First Empire and Tamriel as a whole. Maruk's impact was so great that the Order named themselves the Marukati Selectives in his honor. Given the influence of the Alessian Order, Maruk could be considered among the top 50 most significant figures in Tamrielic history. These examples suggest that it is misleading to assume all Imga are unintelligent. It's more likely they simply lead simpler lives in the jungle and have not had widespread access to education. Although Imga were once portrayed as a prominent beast race in the lore of the Elder Scrolls, Redguard, similar to Argonians and Khajiit, their presence has diminished in later games. Some believe this may be due to concerns from developers about the race being potentially offensive, though no direct source confirms this. Nevertheless, they have not been removed from the lore. Imga continue to be referenced, including in the latest Elder Scrolls Online expansion, Gold Road. While they haven't yet appeared in the games, they remain part of the universe and might show up in the future. Switching focus to a lesser-known race, the sea giants differ significantly from the regular giants seen in Skyrim. These northern relatives are more intelligent, speak multiple languages, craft advanced tools, build longships, and even possess limited magical abilities. They have blue-silver skin, greater resistance to cold, and live primarily on longboats in the Sea of Ghosts, rarely setting foot on Tamriel. Sea giants only make landfall occasionally, usually during extremely harsh winters. When they do, they sometimes raid Nordic coastal villages, and in rare cases, even cities like Solitude, Dawnstar, or Winterhold. However, because sightings are so infrequent, many Nords consider them mythical creatures used to frighten children rather than real beings. The Snow Elves had a complex writing system that was more intricate and stylized than most other elf races, resembling the Aladon or ancient Almer languages rather than the simplified Demer script. It's believed that they had kings and queens, and they were capable of constructing some of the most advanced architecture and statues of their time in Tamriel's history. White was a prominent color in their culture, used heavily in their architecture and iconography, with most of their buildings made of snow-white stone. Magic played a significant role in their society, especially in transportation, and the Snow Elves had a natural aptitude for it. However, much of their culture, including details about their food and government, was erased after centuries of conflict with the Nords. The Snow Elves had lived in Skyrim for centuries before humans began arriving by ship from Atora, the homeland of the humans. Initially, these humans were mostly criminals, exiles, and second sons of nobles seeking adventure, and they didn't settle in Skyrim, but continued southward, eventually becoming the Proto-Imperials and the Hammerfell humans. Some, however, stayed in Skyrim, where they coexisted uneasily with the Snow Elves. Relations remained relatively peaceful at first, but over time, as human settlements grew into cities and their influence spread, tensions between the two races began to rise. The exact cause of a major tragedy is unclear, but it is believed that the Snow Elves launched a brutal attack on the first official human colony, Sarthal, and wiped out the entire population. One theory suggests that the Snow Elves wanted control of the powerful Eye of Magnus, which had been discovered by the humans in the city, while another posits that the growing human presence in Skyrim had led to escalating tensions. Whatever the reason, the attack led to the destruction of Sarthal, but the exact cause remains a mystery due to the reliability of the sources, especially Nordic history, which often demonize the Snow Elves. The massacre of Sarthal led to one of the few survivors, Lord Isgor, later King Isgor, seeking help from a Torah. He returned with a large force, possibly more than the 500 companions often cited, to take revenge on the Snow Elves. Upon arriving in Tamriel, war broke out, and Isgor's forces began their conquest of Skyrim, killing many Snow Elves in the process and committing atrocities. This marked the end of Snow Elf dominance in Skyrim, though the conflict and killings continued gradually, rather than being an immediate or all-encompassing extermination. The chieftain, aided by a shaman for religious matters and a war chief for military concerns, is believed to be the original follower of Zen, the god of toil. It is said that sailors and fishermen played a role in spreading the worship of Zen across southern Tamriel, particularly in Vinwood. While the full details of their pantheon remain unclear, it is known to include both Adra and Daedra, with figures like Cephas Vile being part of their divine circle alongside Zen and Enclavis Vile. Additionally, there are out-of-game texts suggesting they worshipped three gods referred to as the Mothers of the Around Us, which are Mara, Deb, and Kin, with Deb and Kin being aspects of Debella and Kinra. However, these claims are based on unofficial sources and should be taken with caution. Towards the end of their existence, this society began to organize more formally during the Rhene Empire's occupation of Black Marsh. During this period, the Kingi helped the Empire secure the province, contributing to the occupation by providing garrisons and military support. Some Kingi even held notable positions, such as Zook, who served as a bodyguard to Riemann III's wife and was involved in the assassination of Riemann III. Despite briefly thriving under the Empire, the Kingi's society was devastated by the Canaran flu, which swept through Black Marsh in the middle of the Second Era. This plague nearly wiped out their entire population, and by the year 583 of the Second Era, which is when Elder Scrolls Online takes place, their civilization had largely collapsed. It looks like you've pasted file paths or content for text that needs paraphrasing. Could you clarify which specific text you'd like me to paraphrase into English? You can paste the relevant text here. Weapons made from whalebone are considered to be of very high quality. Some sources from Tamriel even suggest they surpass certain metal weapons found there, being both stronger and lighter, a notable detail from the lore. The sea giants appear to be organized in a rather primitive way, as they have chiefs, indicating they likely live in small, tribal communities similar to orcs. However, titles like captain used when they're at sea suggest they may have more complex hierarchies in certain contexts. Not much is known about their cultural organization beyond this, though it's clear that half-giants are always subordinate to full sea giants, often seen serving them rather than the other way around. Earlier, their language was mentioned. Although there's limited official information in the game's lore, compiled voice lines in their native tongue reveal that their language shares some vocabulary with the language of regular giants, but remains distinct overall. This difference makes sense given how long these related species have been separated, assuming both originated from Atmora. In the Elder Scrolls Online, which takes place in the year 582 of the Second Era, notably Cold Year players can encounter sea giants raiding northern coastal villages. Their absence in the Elder Scrolls V, Skyrim doesn't necessarily mean they went extinct, since lore suggests they only occasionally land on Tamriel, and their absence could simply be due to it not being a particularly cold year during Skyrim's events. Turning to another ancient and debated group in the lore, the left-handed elves, also known as Sinistral Elves or Sinistral Mer. These elves lived on the continent of Yokuda, far west of Tamriel, during the Merethic and possibly early First Era. They shared this land with a dark-skinned human race known as the Yokudans. After migrating to Tamriel, the Yokudans became known as the Red Guards. Historically, the left-handed elves ruled over Yokuda, forming an empire that supposedly spanned most of the continent, which was then nearly 4 times the size of Tamriel. Their empire featured grand structures, including the legendary Orichalc Tower and temples built from gypsum alabaster, a material associated with their architecture. The human population under their rule suffered in unspecified ways, possibly through slavery, similar to humans under Ayleid rule in Cyrodiil, or through a system of second-class citizenship akin to humans living under the Durinian High Rock. Despite this suffering, the two groups coexisted long enough for elements of the left-handed elves' language to influence the Yokudan language, allowing modern Tamrielic scholars to decipher some ancient texts. It's unclear whether the Elf Empire was centralized under a single ruler or made up of multiple allied states, similar to the Ayleid Empire. Eventually, the empire collapsed after. Is this conversation helpful so far? One theory suggests that the Khajiit may have killed them in an attempt to expand their territory over Sidle. Another theory, mentioned by some in the lore, is that the bird-like people were among the first races enslaved by the aliens or wild elves as they began settling on Tammin. This led to their gradual extinction as they were enslaved and eventually killed by the aliens, whose kingdoms and empire were largely built on the subjugation of those they considered inferior. These are the theories proposed by scholars in the universe, but I have a few other ideas as well. One theory I've come across is that it was just a tribe of early humans, similar to the kin. Nymphs are extremely shy and solitary creatures, making them very rare and even less likely to be found in populated areas. They tend to live in remote, natural environments, often near the coast, in caves or grottos where they keep to themselves and avoid contact with others. Despite not being associated with the sea and Daggerfall, nymphs often reside in coastal areas or on deserted tropical islands. In the Elder Scrolls Online, we, the Imga, while not as advanced or intelligent as some other playable races, are not simply animal-like beings, as some in the community claim. They have a level of interaction with other races, especially the Bosmer, with whom they share certain tree cities in Valenwood. In these cities, the Imga live in the treetops and are integrated into the ecosystem. There are some unofficial accounts from former Bethesda developers suggesting that some Bosmer dislike the Imga, though this contradicts most of the known lore, so it's not widely believed. Still, it leaves open the possibility that some conflict or unease between the two races could exist in certain regions of Valenwood. One group the Imga are definitely cautious around are the High Elves. They hold the High Elves in extremely high regard, seeing them as the ultimate societal ideal and aspiring to emulate them. This admiration manifests in behaviors like wearing capes and mimicking the High Elves' speech and mannerisms, though these attempts often come across as awkward. They also adopt extravagant, meaningless titles for themselves and try to behave in a way they believe High Elves would, even down to the point of pretending to despise humans. The Imga are also known to perfume the edges of their capes so they can hold them to their noses when humans are near, as they believe humans have a foul odor, likely influenced by their observations of High Elves. In extreme cases, some Imga have even tried to shave off all their fur and powder their skin in an attempt to look like High Elves, though they are usually too clumsy to pull it off and end up injuring themselves, leading to a rather pathetic appearance. Despite these exaggerated efforts, most Imga simply live peacefully in Valenwood's ruins and treetops. It's not that they don't respect High Elves, but rather that they don't all go to the extreme lengths of trying to imitate them. There were plans for Imga to appear in Elder Scrolls Online, but this content was cut late in development, so we don't have a clear understanding of what they might look like. However, data miners discovered a few details, like a planned quest where players would go on a treasure hunt with an Imga tribe for what they considered precious High Elven cutlery. The names of the Imga suggest their more primitive nature, with examples like Kunun, Biar, and Fush, indicating a caveman-like simplicity. While they were intended to play a small role in Elder Scrolls Online, they likely would have only appeared in a few quests, as the Imga prefer to avoid conflict and retreat deep into the jungle during wartime. They typically re-emerge when peace is restored. There is also some speculation about a significant Imga colony in the walking city of Feste, which has been teased in the game's lore, but never fully developed. If they appear in future content, this could be a point of interest for fans of the Imga. Sea giants are believed to have existed for a long time, with their first recorded sightings on the northern coasts of Skyrim, dating back to the middle of the First Era. According to the lore, these giants live on enormous longboats year-round, and only make landfall when the sea freezes and they can no longer sail. The people of Tamriel speculate that they sustain themselves by hunting whales in the Sea of Ghosts, and their extreme cold resistance allows them to endure the harsh northern waters without issue. The giants are said to drink salt water and consume whale meat to survive. However, there's an alternate theory suggesting that the sea giants may actually reside along the coasts of Atmora, an ancient continent north of Skyrim that once hosted humans before it became uninhabitable due to freezing temperatures. This theory is based on the fact that Atmora had giants and was believed to have frozen over during the First Era. If the sea giants came from there, They could have adapted to the cold and fished for sustenance, possibly using melted snow and ice for fresh water. The theory also accounts for the half-giants seen in raiding parties. These half-giants are believed to be descendants of human giant unions, possibly dating back to when Atmora was still inhabitable, or just before it froze over. Given how rare sightings of sea giants are in Skyrim, it's likely that these half-giants, who share the cold resistance of their ancestors, are a long-standing product of human-giant interbreeding. Despite these speculations, the lore only indicates that sea giants live on their longboats throughout the year. However, the logistics of surviving solely on salt water and whale meat seem improbable, leading to the suggestion that they might actually reside on Atmora or its remnants. Their seafaring lifestyle is evident from the materials used in their tools and clothing, which are mostly made from whale bones, horker hides, whale skin, and the scales of an unknown sea creature. The sea giants' limited access to land-based resources explains why their raiding parties often target northern villages in Skyrim for materials like wood and metal, which are difficult to find in their own environment. These materials are likely used to repair their longboats, as using whale bones as boat material would not be the most durable option. Additionally, they seem to repurpose materials from destroyed Nordic ships, especially for repairs, showing their ingenuity in utilizing whatever they can find. Interestingly, the sea giants are known to attack Nordic ships on the Sea of Ghosts, and sailors claim that anyone who sees a sea giant won't live to tell the tale. Their harpoons and other weapons, which are likely made from similar materials, reflect their resourcefulness in crafting tools from what they can obtain from the sea and from enemy ships. The Yukon humans hunted and killed the left-handed elves due to their hatred for them, which stemmed from the suffering they endured under the elves' rule. Although this nearly led to the complete extinction of the left-handed elf society, some elves fled east during the war with the Yukons and settled on the Sisters Isles, located between Tamriel and Yokuda. They tried to conquer these islands in a bloody war against the Tamrielic druids who had settled there, but their conquest was stopped by a volcanic eruption. This eruption killed most of the left-handed elves on the island, and the remaining few were eventually wiped out by migrating Yukons, who, after fleeing from the sinking Yuna, encountered these elf remnants on their way to Stel. The Yukon's intense hatred for elves led them to kill any elf-like being, including Tamrielic elves, who had nothing to do with the left-handed elves. Even whole settlements of elves along Hammerfell's coast were massacred without the possibility of surrender. While no one knows exactly what the left-handed elves looked like, many, including myself, speculate they had darker skin tones, similar to the Red Guards, and some fan art depicts them with red hair, though there is no source confirming this. The red hair seems to be an artistic choice by the few who have created artwork of them. What is known is that they use snakes in their iconography and decoration on weapons and armor. They primarily fought defensively, using shields, a tactic the ancient Yukons rarely employed. They also crafted with a rare greenish cyan metal called chocola, which originated from Yokuda, and used onyx as their primary gem for crafting. They may have also invented singer steel, a material the Red Guards claim to have invented on Yuna, which is steel mixed with orichalcum. There is evidence suggesting the left-handed elves might have crafted with this material before the ancient Yukons, though it's unclear who invented it first. Another interesting aspect of their culture is their belief that the soul resided in the abdomen rather than the head, which differs from other cultures. A faction of the left-handed elves had a unique perspective on death. They believed that there was no afterlife. While most cultures believed in some form of afterlife, whether a neutral afterlife or an honorable one like the Nords' belief in Sovngarde, the left-handed elves believed that after death, there was nothing. They thought the Yukons also knew there was no afterlife but lied to themselves, believing in honor as a way to secure a better afterlife. The left-handed elves saw this as a comforting lie, as they believed there was no comfort after death. Their philosophy was that acknowledging there was nothing after death would make their people stronger, because it would push them to live fully in the present rather than living for a better afterlife. This belief system was unique compared to most other races who at least believed in some form of afterlife. It is also mentioned that the left-handed elves may have referred to themselves as the Kanoye, a name they might have used for their people, though this source might be referring to a specific faction or tribe of them. By this point, the Lumathit were already considered a rare sight, while they had once lived in fairly large towns and had started to adopt a more settled lifestyle away from their previous nomadic ways. By the later part of the First Era, most of these towns had been abandoned. Some believe they were displaced by the Argonians who wanted to settle in those areas. Others think it was a more gradual process, where the Argonians moved in, coexisted with the Lumathit for a time, and then the Lumathit chose to return to the swamps on their own. Regardless of the cause, most of the Lumathit ended up moving back into the swamps for unknown reasons, either to resume a nomadic lifestyle or to live in small, remote villages deep within the wetlands, rather than in the larger settlements along the coast. Then came the Nahatan flu, which devastated the already declining Lumathit population, to the point that none are believed to be alive on Tamriel today. There has been speculation both among in-universe scholars and real-world fans that the Lumathite might have been related to the Khajiit. If this is true, it's possible they had a similar system of transformation based on the lunar phases. As covered in discussions about the various Khajiit forms, Khajiit take on different shapes depending on the positions of the moons at birth. If the Lumathit shared this trait, then the moons may have played a significant role in their religion as well, and there might have been different forms of Lumathitsm small, like the Khajiits Alfiq, and others large, like the Pamar or Senche. However, there's no solid evidence to support this theory. The only visual reference we have is an official piece of concept art that appears throughout various materials, and that's essentially all we know about the Lumathit. Next is the topic of another extinctor, nearly extinctress, the Snow Elves, also known as the Ancient Falmer of Tamriel, before they were transformed into the goblin-like creatures now commonly referred to as the Falmer. The Snow Elves were a pale-skinned race of elves who lived in what is now Skyrim. They had been present since some of the original Aldmer, the progenitor race of all elves, migrated from the Somerset Isles to the northern parts of Tamriel. They were similar to high elves in many ways, but had white hair and very pale skin, and were more resistant to cold climates. They built a civilization that was considered one of the great powers of ancient Tamriel, rivaling both the remaining elves in the Somerset Isles and the Allied Empire in the heart of Tamriel. However, little is known about their civilization at its peak, because the Nords, who later conquered and nearly wiped them out, destroyed much of their historical records. From what remains, we know they were deeply religious, worshipping a pantheon similar to that of the modern-day High Elves. Their chief deity was Oriel, with Trinimac, Xarxes, Geoffrey, and Finaster also appearing in their religion. Many snow elves aspire to draw closer to the gods and become one with them. They also had a sophisticated writing system and their own calendar, which was vastly different from the Tamrielic calendar modeled after the Gregorian system used in the real world. The Snow Elves' calendar involved mysterious units referred to as markings and surs, which seemed to measure time, with markings likely representing shorter intervals, possibly days or weeks, and surs representing longer spans, perhaps months or years. These terms appear in Snow Elf journals, suggesting surs change less frequently than markings. However, the precise function of this calendar remains unclear. Some scholars suggest these may not be. The beliefs around the afterlife and death related to the left-handed elves may not apply to all of them. What was said about their name might. The Uide, an intelligent fox-like species, once inhabited the southern regions of Black Marsh during the First and early Second Eras, before eventually becoming extinct. They primarily lived in coastal and lighter swamp areas, and their society was largely tribal and nomadic, consisting of small villages and hunter-gatherer groups that moved throughout the swamps. Bethesda's concept art from recent years reveals that they carried large packs, used walking canes for long-distance travel, and wore clothes made of animal furs and hides, consistent with their lifestyle. The Lloyd were also skilled in making toys, particularly kites for children. Additionally, they had a deep knowledge of medicinal plants, possibly surpassing even the Argonians and the human Singa tribes in their understanding of healing herbs. Despite their advanced knowledge, the Lloyd were not known for being warlike. They tended to avoid conflict by fleeing or moving their camps when faced with threats, rather than fighting back. This peaceful nature may have made them vulnerable to slavers, who often took advantage of their unwillingness to defend themselves. The name Yoid was not their own, but rather a term from the Kiti language meaning one from Lilmith, a city founded by the Yoid. However, no one knows what they called themselves. The term has become widely used among scholars, though some on Tamriel still doubt their existence, given the few records and the lack of permanent traces of their civilization. This skepticism is further supported by the fact that the Lloyd used temporary shelters, such as tents and wooden huts, which deteriorated quickly. The Lloyd's extinction is generally attributed to the Conaton flu, a devastating epidemic that wiped out the remaining population in the early Second Era. The quick spread of the disease marked the end of this once thriving race. The fall of Snow Elf dominance in Skyrim did not mark the end of their culture, though it did begin a long conflict with the Nords that saw the Snow Elves gradually lose power. They still existed during the Dragon War and managed to build cities and temples into the early First Era. However, during this time, the Nords showed little respect for their culture, often taking their land without concern. Under Nordic rule, the Snow Elves lived as second-class citizens. It wasn't until King Harold, the first High King of Skyrim, began a campaign to eliminate all traces of Snow Elf culture that they were truly driven toward extinction. This effort came centuries after the initial conquest of Skyrim by Isgramor. The period between Isgramar's conquest and Harold's campaign, lasting 300 to 500 years, is poorly documented. During this time, the Snow Elves survived under Nord control. The reasons for the final conflict that led Harold and his successors to try to erase the Snow Elves from history are unclear, but they were largely successful. Very little remains of Snow Elf culture today. apart from underground ruins and secluded places like the Forgotten Vale. Despite the relentless persecution, the Snow Elves resisted fiercely, and the wars between the two peoples resulted in heavy casualties on both sides. Eventually, the Nords forced the Snow Elves to the brink of extinction by killing many and destroying their settlements. Some Snow Elves went into hiding. Interestingly, not all Nords supported the campaign. Some helped Snow Elf families escape and hide, though this was not enough to prevent their near extinction. The final confrontation came during the First Era on the island of Solstheim, a place the Snow Elves had used as a last refuge. Their last leader, known only as the Snow Prince, made a final stand against the invading Nords. Though he fought valiantly and killed many Nords, he was ultimately slain. According to legend, a young girl named Finna killed the Snow Prince by throwing her mother's sword at him after he had killed her mother in battle. With their leader dead, the remaining Snow Elves could no longer resist. Those who survived had few options. Some fled and intermarried with the High Elves, leading some modern elves to believe they have Snow Elf ancestry. Others hid in remote places like the Chantry of Oriel in the Forgotten Vale. The majority, however, sought refuge with the Dwemer, only to face further tragedy. Though the Dwemer offered shelter, they demanded the Snow Elves eat a fungus that would blind them. Many accepted this, leading to the widespread blinding of the survivors. Things worsened as the Dwemer enslaved the blinded Snow Elves, subjecting them to harsh treatment and forced labor. It is believed that the Dwemer may have also used Tonal. The continent of Akavir is home to 4 dominant intelligent races, though much about it remains unknown. Akavir, meaning Dragonland in several languages, is situated east of Tamriel, across the Paddock Ocean. We don't have any clear maps or detailed geographical knowledge of Akavir, as the continent hasn't been explored in the games. The information we have is mostly based on fan interpretations and descriptions from the lore. It's unlikely that we will ever visit Akavir in future games, so we rely on the fragments of knowledge we have. Throughout history, there have been multiple attempts at invasions between the races of Tamriel and Akavir, but much of what is known about these invasions is incomplete or forgotten by the time of the games. There are remnants of Akavir's past on Tamriel, such as the Dragonguard temples, but little else remains. Only a few individuals have attempted to travel to Akavir, with the most recent being the protagonist of the Elder Scrolls III, Morrowind, after the defeat of Dagon in the Third Era. People of Tamriel are wary of Akavir due to the terrifying reputation of its races. It's also believed that humans once lived on Akavir, but were wiped out by a rival race, the Sei, who are thought to have consumed them. The word eaten here is ambiguous and could refer to literal consumption or perhaps enslavement or assimilation, as the Sei have been shown to reproduce with humans. However, it's unclear whether humans ever existed on Akavir, or if they were merely a legend. Additionally, goblins were reported on Akavir, and, like humans, were likely enslaved. However, elves are not considered a major presence on Akavir, though there are theories about their influence, which are explored elsewhere. As of the Fourth Era, there are 4 dominant races on Akavir, with one having been wiped out. The status of the humans of Akavir remains speculative, and the possibility of other intelligent creatures on the continent hasn't been ruled out. Earlier accounts of interactions between the inhabitants of Tamriel and Akavir suggests that some people with rat-like or canine features resembling the Khajiit were seen on the continent. However, there is little elaboration on these races in the lore, and it's unclear whether they were real or simply made up by early explorers. What is known, however, is that the primary races of Akavir today are the main powers of the 4 nations currently inhabiting the continent. The 5th race that once lived in Akavir were the dragons, who are now all gone from the continent at least as far as we know. Interestingly, Akavir is called the Dragonland because dragons were once native to the continent. However, they are no longer present, which presents some contradictions in the lore. Until the year 324 of the Second Era, Versu was one of the few individuals described as a serpent man, someone possessing both human and snake-like physical traits. However, this cannot be confirmed. Versu and his son were reported to move like eels in a slithering motion, offering a different perspective, but even these reports may not be accurate. Versu's sons, Savir and Chorak, who succeeded him, ruled for another 100 years before Savir was assassinated. The Elder Council then appointed someone of imperial descent. Following the failure of the Akaviri potentate's line in 430 of the Second Era, many of the Say fled from Sidel and joined other Akaviri settlements, particularly in Rimen. These would later be known as the Rimen. After this exodus, the Say's presence in Siu dwindled rapidly, and they faded from major historical records until centuries later. When Uriel V, one of the Septim emperors, stabilized his empire, he decided to look beyond Tamriel. He launched an invasion on Akavir, particularly targeting the areas between Tamriel and Akavir across the Paddock Ocean. This invasion initially found success along the southeastern Akaviri coast, home to the Kingdom of the Say, with settlements like Septimia and Iath being captured. However, the Say soon regrouped, and when their armies and mages responded effectively, the Imperial forces were swiftly routed in the Battle of Ith in 290 of the Third Era. This defeat resulted in the loss of at least 1 legion, with 4 others captured, and left Emperor Uriel V dead or enslaved. Only 1 Imperial naval fleet managed to escape and return to Tamriel. The causes of the swift Imperial defeat remain unclear. Some attribute it to the Say's superior combat skills, both magical and physical, possibly backed by rumors of their powerful mages. This leads back to the question of the Say's true origins, with several theories circulating. Theory 1 proposes that the Say are entirely human, but are highly advanced in engineering and power. This is partially supported by depictions of them as men, kneeling before Dragonborn in the Skyhaven Temple, as well as accounts from Uriel V's invasion describing them as mounted men, with no mention of snake-like features. Theory 2 suggests the Say are entirely snake-like beings who use enslaved humans from Ever as their army's bulk, with only the higher-ranking officers being the actual snake-like Say. This could explain why human forces were easily integrated into Imperial society, and why Riemann Sil might have granted amnesty to the Say after their invasion, potentially seeking to rid their forces of the snake overlords. Some Say officers captured at Pale Pass were still reported as human, which adds complexity to this theory. Theory 3 posits that 2 separate races existed in Akavir humans and vampiric serpent-like beast folk who coexisted. This theory suggests that the Say men were primarily the ones who undertook the conquest of Tamriel during the First Era, focusing on dragon slaying and prophecies. It also speculates that these Say may have known more about Tamriel than the Tamrielians, as they were aware of Remencel's dragonborn heritage. It also entertains the possibility that the Say may have bred with the serpent folk, explaining figures like the Sai potentate Versu, who is thought to have had a human upper body and serpent-like lower extremities. The final theory revolves around shape-shifting. Some believe that the Say are vampiric serpent creatures capable of shifting into human or other forms, which could explain their ability to disguise themselves as men for extended periods. The Sai likely attempted to integrate into the Empire with the goal of taking control through a Sai Potentation, of whom did rule the Second Empire for a time. However, rumors about his biology are so strange that we can't say for sure if he was entirely serpent-like. What we can agree on is that the Sai seem to originate from the wandering Ela, which might explain why every recorded encounter the people of Tamriel have had with the Say depicts them as humanoid. They also have the ability to use weapons and wear armor. Another notable detail comes from a quest in the Elder Scrolls Online, set in the Stonefalls region. In this quest, the player is asked to bless the remains of those who died during a second Akaviri invasion. The reward is a pair of gauntlets, described as being made to choke the scaly throats of the Akaviri invaders. A veteran of that invasion, Feta Zandalin, is shown to have a deep fear of anything reptilian, a trauma shared by others who survived. Many NPCs from that conflict refer to the Akaviri as snakes or snake men, despite the fact that the second invasion was led mostly by the Kamal. The Sai only joined the remaining Kamal forces later, after the defeat at Windhelm. This implies that the Sai were either present from the beginning alongside the Kamal, or this may be an oversight by the developers. Moving on to the next Akaviri race, the Kamaltha name refers both to the race and their homeland. The Kamal are described as primal snow demons from a region known as Snow Hell. Each year, they emerge from their icy land to attack other regions of Akavir, with the Tang Momonkey-like beings being their frequent targets. While they may seem like mindless beasts, they are intelligent and organized. This is evident in the second Akaviri invasion of Tamriel, led by their king and warlord, Adasum Dirkamal, in the year 2E572. Is this conversation helpful so far? The invasion led to the defeat of the Kamal and the death of their king, who was killed at Red Mountain by Alexia and Wolfarth. Although the invasion was largely unsuccessful, the Kamal are still remembered as the most famous of their race. Many surviving Kamal soldiers later joined the Say in the settlement of Rimmon in Elsewhere. After the king's death, these Kamal, along with the Say and Rimmon, attempted to start a war in Sidel to overthrow Emperor Atreus, a pretender who had outlawed all Avari races because of his opposition to foreigners. Their invasion failed, leading to the near-total destruction of the remaining Kamal and Say forces. Moving on to the Khotun, also known as the Tiger Dragon Empire, which was previously called Poon. The people of Khotun are tiger-like, catfolk with anatomy similar to the Khajiit. This race has never attempted to invade Tamriel, but they are in constant conflict with the Say, considering them their greatest enemy. The dragons of Nur also have a history with the Khotun. While many dragons in Akavir were either enslaved, killed, or fled the continent due to the Say, some managed to escape to Poon. The Khotun and Say became embroiled in a war resulting in the death of the dragons that had taken refuge in Poon. This conflict greatly weakened both the Say and Poon, but the Poon attempted to regain strength by seeking to transform themselves into dragons, likely due to admiration or the pursuit of power they had witnessed from dragons during the war. Rumor has it that a divine figure named Tosh Raka succeeded in transforming into a large orange and black dragon. Some believe this is metaphorical, but the book Mysterious Aviri claims his transformation was physical, and he took on all the traits of a dragon. After this, Tosh Raka became the king of the Poon, renaming the race and the nation to Khotun in an effort to rise above the Say Empire and establish a new era for his people. Tosh Raka's rise made Khotun the most powerful empire in Akavir, even stronger than the Say Empire. Some sources suggest they allied with the Tang Mo race, another group in Akavir, to further solidify their power. Tosh Raka's current goal is to destroy the Say and launch a full-scale invasion of Tamriel, but whether this will happen remains to be seen. It would be interesting to see this unfold in Elder Scrolls 6. Finally, we have the Tang Mo, a race of kind and generous monkey people who live on the Thousand Monkey Isles in Akavir. There are different breeds of Tang Mo, each known for traits like bravery, simplicity, or even madness. The Tang Mo prefer to stay isolated on their islands, avoiding conflict with surrounding nations. While generally peaceful, the Tang Mo have been able to defend their islands successfully when necessary, despite constant threats of being enslaved by other Akaviri nations, especially the Kamal. The Tang Mo have had several conflicts with the Kamal, but they have always managed to repel them. Recently, there have been rumors of the Tang Mo forming alliances with their former enemies, the Khotun. In conclusion, Akavir is home to many strange and fascinating races, just like Tamriel. Though we know very little about the true power and intentions of these races, the full extent of their nations and how they operate remains a mystery, and it's unlikely we'll ever learn more unless we somehow travel to Akavir. This was just a look at some of the more obscure races in the Elder Scrolls universe. While it wasn't an exhaustive list, it covered some of the most interesting ones. The Mirar are known for their mastery over the sea and are no longer worshipped by anyone else. In battle, especially at sea, they are highly effective, utilizing massive sea serpents as war beasts and mounts in the water. They also use tamed rybers as aquatic attack dogs during combat with other ships. The Mirar are feared opponents, as their storm mages can manipulate the winds, either slowing down or even capsizing enemy ships, making them easy targets for Mirar boarding parties. These ships are often designed to resemble large, floating insects with membranous sails, though they are also known to use more traditional vessels. When boarding enemy ships, the most terrifying members of their teams are the Marmor Leviathan stall, scaled warriors with hunched backs. These Leviathans are quite peculiar.
Nixino Sound Studio.